Hi, I'm Linda Mal, and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the San Antonio Museum of Art and speak with the artist Jamie Wyeth about his exhibition. Now for Art This Week.
Hi, I'm Leah Thompson. I'm here with artist Jamie Wyeth, and we're here today at the SAMA. Thank you for joining us, Jamie.
Pleasure to be here.
So could you tell us a bit about how all these works were selected for the exhibit?
Well, the exhibition was organized by the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, which is a huge museum, and they've been working in this exhibition for 5 years. I mean, these big museums spend a lot of time in an exhibition. And so then they said, well, rather than just Boston, let's travel it. And I visited the museum here and always thought it was a stunning building and the whole space. And so that was suggested, and they said they'd love to have the show. So here we are.
And so you're mostly noted for your portraits, particularly of individuals like Warhol and JFK. Could you explain a bit about your process and technique as a painter?
Well, this is a little, the JFK portrait was sort of curious. I did this after his death. The White House came to me and said, would I do an official portrait? And so I started this official portrait, very romantic. This was shortly after he died. And I felt it lacked. I was working from photographs, which I hate doing. So I then went to the two brothers who were alive, Bobby and Teddy, and followed them around, campaigned with them, did endless drawings that you see in the exhibition, and then tore up what I was working on. I created this portrait. Under it is actually a portrait of Teddy, just to get life into it. And then finished this, and it was rather controversial at the time. He was the martyred young president, blue-eyed, blonde hair, neither of which he was. And so this was rather considered sort of very blunt and not attractive of him. It's now the national stamp of Ireland. It's become a very sort of popular image of him. So paintings evolve with their history, you know, and I just do them. I create them, but it's interesting for me to see what happens to them.
So now we're standing in front of Wyeth's portrait of Andy Warhol. Could you tell us a bit about your process with portraits, how you get to know the person? It feels like an immersive experience.
Yeah, I sort of equate it sort of to acting. I mean, try to become the person almost. I'm not interested in just having the person sit there frozen in a position. It's spending time with the person, watching them eat, watching them sleep. And in the case of Warhol, I spent a year working with him and doing many, many drawings and so forth. And because I just don't want it a momentary thing. To me, a painted portrait is a combination of his moods, his happiness, his hates, and so forth. And it's a really evolving process for me, and out of it comes sometimes a successful portrait, sometimes not. That's why I don't do commission portraits. To paint somebody that I'd never met before, to sit down and just do a nose and a mouth and two eyes, sort of disinterests me. What does interest me about portraits are people that I've known. I know their life, I know what has gone into their life and so forth. So it's more than just an image.
And so you were around a lot during Andy Warhol's factory days. How are you able to sort of maintain your voice as an artist? You come from a very traditional painting background, and you were around all this incredible pop art, but it never really permeated your work.
Well, oddly enough, it did in a way. If you look at my later things, I did boxes with chickens in them and so forth. But I was able to isolate myself in the factory. I created a little studio. He sort of gave me a corner of the room. And yes, this world was going on around me, but that to me was his life, and I wanted to study it. And in fact, I contributed a little bit to it. I brought a filmmaker friend of mine, was working with a bodybuilder called Arnold Schwarzenegger, and was doing this film called Pumping Iron. And so he kept saying, you've got to do a drawing of Schwarzenegger, who barely spoke English at the time. So I brought him down to the factory, where you can imagine Mr. Universe at the factory. Every queen just zoomed in on Mr. Universe, and so it created quite a stir at the factory to have him parading around half dressed, you know, and so forth. So I mean, I got a lot out of it, and I think Andy did too. And he was so fascinating. He was very childlike, and always a sense of wonder. And we spent most of our time going to toy stores and whatnot, you know, collecting toys. So Anyway, I hope it comes through in the portrait. He always said I used too much pimple paint. You know, he was very concerned of how he looked. He'd put makeup on in the morning, and his wig on, and the eyebrows were all pasted on and so forth. So, but I sort of painted him on this particular portrait like a deer in the headlights, you know, just boom, there he is.
So you had mentioned earlier that even your landscapes are more portraits than anything. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Well, this, obviously a bale of hay, and at the time I just got intrigued with this bale of hay. This is on my farm in Pennsylvania, but I got so intrigued I covered it up at night, the bale. I wanted to be an absolute portrait of a bale of hay, not just a pretty scene of hay in a field and so forth. So I went further and further, and so I consider these as much portraits as the ones of people and animals that I do, and which I think gives it a little more resonance. It's not just a scene or a pretty picture. And amazingly enough, some audiences get that. I think they look at it and they say, well, there's something more to this than just a bunch of hay sitting in a field. That's what's exciting to me about the painting.
Cool. Could you explain a little bit about your actual physical process and technique?
Well, I'm a very odd painter in that I use my fingers and the opposite end of the brush more than the brush. I mean, I get carried away, and I think it breaks me not to just sit there and calmly add brush strokes. I'm a wild painter. I mean, paint's flying all around me just to get the spontaneity of it and the excitement of it. I mean, this I use the edge of my fingernail to make these sharp sort of pieces of hay and whatnot, and the round things I used the round end of a pencil without the eraser to make the circles. You know, anything that gets the job done. I've used dirt and rubbed it into areas, and so, you know, the process is a very non-traditional process, but that's what makes it exciting for me, I think.
I think that is definitely the physicality of the process is what makes it such an immersive viewing experience.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I'm happy you feel that way. That's great.
Now, of course, you come from a very well-established painting family, and you said that recently you had been inspired by dreams of your family members, N.C. Wyeth and Andrew Wyeth. Could you tell us a bit more about this dream series that you've created?
Well, this was shortly after my father died, and I live on this island off the coast of Maine with these huge cliffs and whatnot, and I had this uncanny dream, and I don't know if you dream where you think it actually happened. It was that vivid, and it kept returning, kept reoccurring, and so then I thought, well, I've got to paint this. And so I've done a number of versions of this. It started with my father and grandfather. I dreamed that I came over the hill in the storm on the island with the cliffs, and there were two figures, and as I approached, I realized it was my father and grandfather standing. Then I looked, and there was Warhol down observing them, and Winslow Homer, a painter that my father loved his work. And so I put it down in paint, and then I thought, that's really not what the dream is about. So I went to another version, and there are various ones. And they are very personal to me, but it's just, and as I said, I've done like 7 or 8 of these things during that year to try to get the dream down. And again, that's what I think young people, they can paint their dreams. That's where painting is so open and interesting, I think, for a young person to get involved. Because you can take a dream and create a whole world around it.
We want to thank Jamie for speaking with us. For more information on the exhibition, go to samuseum.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.